Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to AJ507 Ethics in Criminal Justice. My name is Tony Farrar, and of course, I am your instructor for this semester. So this week's chapter we're going to cover chapter 3, where we're going to take a look at justice and law. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We have a lot to cover. So let's take a look at some of the learning objectives. So first, we want to be able to describe the three themes included in the definition of justice. Define Aristotle's distributive and corrective justice. Distinguish between substantive and procedural justice, including how procedural justice impacts wrongful convictions and perceptions of racial discrimination. Explain the concept of restorative justice and the programs that are affiliated with it, and describe civil disobedience and when it may be appropriate. So a lot of things, a lot of ground to cover. So again, let's go ahead and just kind of jump right into our discussion for today. So it may seem strange that an ethics book has a chapter on justice, but the concept of justice is integrally related to ethics, and obviously especially relevant in a discussion of ethical issues related to criminal justice professionals. Now, professionals in the criminal justice system serve and promote the interests of law and justice. So before we really explore the ethical issues and dilemmas that confront them, we're going to first talk about or have a discussion of justice itself. Okay? So many of the major philosophers and those who study ethics, etc., frame their discussion of ethics around the concept of justice. So, as we start to kind of talk about this, again, professionals in this criminal justice system serve and promote the interests of law and justice. So we need to explore justice itself and also take a really hard look at justice and what it means, and some of the components. Now, justice differs from benevolence, generosity, gratitude, friendship, and compassion. So justice should not be confused with good, even though that's kind of one of the ways that we look at it, right? Now, Lucas in 1980 argued that, again, justice differs from benevolence, generosity, gratitude, and compassion. So we don't want to get these two things mixed up, but it kind of seems a little counterintuitive, right? It seems like they should kind of go together. But as we said before, any discussion of justice includes at least three continuing themes: fairness, equality, and impartiality. And we're going to take kind of a closer look at each one of those. So as we look at the three themes, we'll start with fairness. So fairness is related to equal treatment. Parents ordinarily give each child the same allowance unless differences between the children, such as age or duties, warrant a different amount, right? And children are sensitive to issues of fairness long before they grasp more abstract ideas of justice. And no doubt every parent has heard, the cry, "It's not fair. He got more than I did," or "She got more than I did," etc. She always gets the front seat versus the back seat, etc. And what children are sensing here is unequal and therefore unfair treatment. So the concept of fairness is tied to equality and impartiality. So by definition, fairness is the condition of being impartial, the allocation of equal shares or equal opportunities or equal treatment. Now, next would be equality. And equality refers to equal shares or equal treatment as well. And there is a, kind of a predisposition to demand equity or equal shares for all or equal shares for similar people, right? The concept of equality is also present in retributive justice, in the belief that similar crimes should be punished equally or equal justice for all, right? Now, in contrast to the concept of equal shares is the idea of needs or deserts. In other words, we should get what we need or alternatively what we deserve by status, merit, or other reasons. So definition-wise, when we look at equality, okay, the same value, rights, or treatment between all in a specific group. It refers to equal shares or equal treatment as well. And then finally, the last of the three that we're talking about, impartiality. And impartiality is also related to the concept of equal treatment. At the core of our system of criminal justice is the theme of impartiality. Our symbol of justice represents, with her blindfold, impartiality towards special groups, and with her scales, proportionally just punishments, right? So we're talking about Lady Justice, the blindfold and the scales. Impartiality implies fair and equal treatment of all without discrimination and bias. And it's hard to reconcile the ideal of blind justice with, taking individual circumstances into consideration when determining culpability or punishment. Most would argue individual differences and circumstances should be taken into, or into consideration, if not during a finding of guilt or innocence, then at least when sentencing occurs. If the blindfold of Lady Justice signifies no special treatment for the rich or the powerful, then it must also signify no special consideration for the young or disparate or for any extraordinary circumstance in a criminal case. So, kind of an interesting concept. So by definition, impartiality, not favoring one party or interest more than another. So again, these are kind of the three themes that come about when we talk about justice, right? Okay, so we talked about this a little bit, but before we jump into the origins of the concept of justice, it is important that we kind of take a look at our symbol of justice again. And if you've never seen Lady Justice, well, if you Google Lady Justice, there's a thousands and thousands of different photos. But our symbol of justice represents, with her blindfold, impartiality towards special groups, and with her scales, proportionality, just punishments. And again, impartiality implies fair and equal treatment of all without discrimination or bias. So that's kind of an interesting thing to look at when you kind of get that picture in your mind of Lady Justice. Okay, so with that being said, we're now going to look at the origin of the concept of justice. So by definition, just quickly, justice, the quality of being impartial, fair, and just. okay, derived from the Latin word justitia, concerning rules of law. So justice, though, originated in the Greek word dike, and that's D-I-K-E if you're wondering how to spell it, which is associated with the concept of everything staying in its assigned place or natural role. And this idea is closely associated with the definitions of justice given by both Plato and Aristotle. Now, Plato associated justice with maintaining the kind of societal status quo. Justice is one of 4 civic virtues, the other being wisdom, temperance, and courage. And in an ordered state, everyone performs his or her role and does not interfere with others. And each person's role is the one for which the individual is best fitted by nature. Thus, natural law is upheld. Now, moreover, it is in everyone's self-interest to have this ordered existence continue, because it provides the means to a good life and appropriate human happiness. So Plato believed, again, that justice was achieved by maintaining that social status quo. And he kind of classed it as if, as one of the 4 civic virtues, along with wisdom, temperance, and courage. Now, in Aristotle's conception of justice, the lack of freedom and opportunity for some people, slaves and women for instance, did not conflict with justice if the individual was in the role for which by nature he or she was best suited for. In other words, those with the highest intellect should be given schooling. Those who were musically inclined should be musicians in society, and those with qualities that were suited for, let's say, servitude should be slaves. Now, remember, Aristotle lived in a time where slavery was an accepted practice, and people believed that slaves were different in aptitude and character from free men. But even Aristotle recognized that injustice may occur when someone placed into slavery, for instance, a vanquished enemy might not be naturally suited for slavery. So Aristotle associated justice with the law. If a person violated the law, he would be considered unjust. All right. However, he didn't view justice solely as a function of law. A person's dealings with others in all areas of life determined whether he or she could be considered just or unjust. So kind of couple of different aspects, right? And Aristotle also distinguished between 2 types of justice: distributive justice and corrective justice. Now, distributive justice concerns what measurement should be used to allocate society's resources. So, for instance, this type of justice would include issues such as affirmative action, welfare, free schooling, and other goods and opportunities, and how society distributes them amongst their members. So basically, how things should be allocated. And corrective justice concerns unfair advantage or undeserved harm between people. And justice demands remedies or compensation to the injured party. Okay, so again, Aristotle has these 2 distinguishing areas. Now, the concept of the appropriate and just allocation of society's goods and interests is one of the central themes in discussions of justice. The goods that one might possess include the following. So it could be economic goods, so it could be income or property. Opportunities for development, so that could be education or citizenship, or recognition, which could be honor or status. So if there was enough of everything, goods, opportunity, and status for everyone, issues of distributed justice are less likely to rise, right? And two valid claims to possession are need and desert. And different writers have presented various proposals deciding the issues of entitlement, etc. So as we kind of look at this again, justice involves rightful possession of, again, economic goods, income or property, opportunities for development, education or citizenship, or recognition, which is honor or status. And since some possessions are scarce, justice then requires that goods be distributed using standards of entitlement such as need and desert. Okay. So there are, when we look at a couple other things, Lucas in 1980 identified distributions based on need, merit, performance, ability, rank, station, worth, work, agreements, requirements of the common good, valuation of service, and legal entitlement. And the various theories can be categorized as egalitarian, Marxist, libertarian, or utilitarian, depending upon the factors that are emphasized. So we'll just take a really quick look at those, okay? So a couple of more definitions for you to kind of think about. So first we have egalitarian theories. And these start with the basic premise of equality or equal shares for all. And then Marxist theories place need above entitlement. Then you have libertarian theories that promote freedom from interference by government in social and economic spheres, therefore merit, entitlement, and productive contributions are given weight over need or equal shares. And then utilitarian theories attempt to maximize benefits for individuals and society with a mixed emphasis on entitlement and needs. So that kind of takes us to John Rawls' theory of justice. So John Rawls' theory of justice is perhaps the best known modern conception of justice. And he elegantly combines utilitarian and rights-based concepts in his theory of distributive justice. And basically, he proposes an equal distribution unless a different distribution would benefit the disadvantaged. So Rawls believes that any inequalities of society should be to the benefit of those who are basically least advantaged. So again, just to kind of summarize it up, that each person is to have equal right to the most extensive total system of basic liberties compatible with a similar system of liberty for all. And that social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both reasonably expected to be to everyone's advantage and attached to positions and offices open to everyone. And part of, some of the arguments, etc. So, and we'll kind of take a look at that. Rawls may argue for a purely objective, hiring scoring system, except when one gives extra points to those who are least well off, and tax rebates that are equally distributed, except they are a bit more favorable for those in the lower income brackets. Rao kind of uses a device that he calls the veil of ignorance to explain the idea that people will develop fair principles of distribution only if they are ignorant of their position in society. So the veil of ignorance cannot counteract human selfishness and self-interest. Preferring the least well-off is bad for a society leads to lack of incentive and decline of standards. And Raoul's approach to distribution ignores basically desert and merit. So that's kind of a little overview of the veil of ignorance. So again, Raoul's idea that people develop fair principles of distribution only if they are ignorant of their position in society. And I have a link to a little video if you wanted to take the time to watch that. Okay, so kind of moving on now, we're going to talk a little bit about corrective justice. So recall that in addition to distributive justice, Aristotle also described corrective justice, which is concerned with balancing the unfair advantage. Okay? And there are two components of corrective justice that should be kind of differentiated, if you will. So substantive justice basically refers to issues of inherent fairness. It concerns the concept of just deserts or how one determines fair punishment. Now, procedural justice concerns the steps we must take before administering that particular punishment. Okay? And so those are kind of some differences between the two. Next, we have retributive justice. And the concept of retributive justice is one of balance, basically saying that justice demands that the criminal must suffer pain or loss proportional to what the victim was forced to suffer. Kind of a life for a life might be an easy measure, but most cases involve other forms of harm. So again, the component of justice that concerns the determination and methods of punishment. Now, you kind of want to ask yourself, well, how does one determine the amount of physical or mental pain suffered by the victim or financial loss, such as income or future loss in most crimes? And if an offender cannot pay back his financial losses, how do you equate imprisonment with fines or restitution? So that's kind of an interesting thing for us to think about. And before we get to utilitarian justice, let's kind of finish this out. Now, historically, corporal and capital punishment were used for both property crime and violent crime. With the development of the penitentiary system that came about in the early 1800s, punishment was more likely to be measured by the number of years of imprisonment rather than the amount of physical pain. However, a year in prison is hard to equate, to any crime. How many prison years are equal to a burglary? How many prison years are equal to a drug offense? Research on prison adjustment indicates that a year in prison might be no more than mildly inconvenient for some. But, of course, for others, it might lead to suicide or mental illness, right? Because you just don't know how that impacts each individual. So these are interesting concepts. And again, we're framing this all under the umbrella of the justice system. So, in earlier justice systems, the status of the victim was important in determining the level of harm and also the punishment. Nobles were more important than freemen, who were more important than slaves. So there was kind of that hierarchy there. And, kind of adding to that, men were more important than women. So punishment for offenders was weighed by, these designations of the worth of the victim. And although we have no formal system for weighing punishment in this way, and have rejected the worth of the victim as a rationale for punishment, many believe that our justice system is still follows kind of this practice a little bit, but more informally. Because people might argue that harsher sentences are given to, or given when the victim is white, when the victim is black, and then, or when the victim is rich as opposed to poor. So again, kind of interesting for us to think about these things, right? Okay, so now utilitarian justice. So as discussed, or as we have discussed, retributive justice justifies punishment simply because the offender deserves it, right? And by definition, when you talk about retributive justice, that's kind of what it means. Now, however, utilitarian justice only supports punishment if it benefits society. So, a couple of criminologists, Cesar Bassaria and Jeremy Bentham, provided a utilitarian rationale for proportionality and punishment. And punishment should be based on the seriousness of the crime. The more serious the crime, or the greater the reward, offered the criminal, the more serious and severe the punishment should be to deter the individual from committing the crime again. So a utilitarian framework of justice would justify punishment based on deterrence. And we've learned a little bit about that. But by definition, utilitarian justice, the type of justice that, looks to the greatest good for all as the end. And it only supports that punishment if it benefits society as a whole. And then another definition, just to kind of throw in there, we call it hedonistic calculus. This is concerned with the measuring the potential rewards of the crime, so the amount of threatened pain could be set to deter people from committing that particular crime. Okay, so we're going to kind of move on a little bit, and we're going to talk about procedural justice and some aspects that go along with procedural justice. And actually, we're probably right about at that 30-minute mark. So maybe we'll go ahead and take our break right now. And then when we come back, we'll jump into part 2 and we'll talk about procedural justice.